I used to think love was enough to hold two people together through anything. I really did. Turns out love is more like duct tape. It can patch a lot of things, but it was never designed to hold the whole structure together. My name's Ryan. I'm 34. I work in logistics management, and for the last 10 years, I've shared my life with the same woman 10 years. That's longer than some people's careers, longer than most friendships, long enough that you start to think you know exactly who you married, what she wants, how she thinks, what she's afraid of, long enough to get comfortable, maybe too comfortable her names. Claire, and before you get the wrong idea, this isn't a story about cheating or betrayal in the way most people mean it. It's something slower than that, something that sneaks up on you like a slow leak in a tire. Your driving fine life feels normal, and then one morning you wake up and you're completely flat on the side of the road, wondering how you didn't notice sooner. We found out Claire was pregnant about 4 months ago. And I want to be clear, I was happy, genuinely happy we'd talked about kids. We both wanted them. The timing felt right. I remember standing in the bathroom doorway while she held up the test, and I just started laughing. Not nervous. Laughing, real laughing, the kind that comes up from somewhere deep, but that version of me. The guy laughing in the bathroom doorway feels like a completely different person now, because somewhere between that moment and today, something shifted, and I don't mean the obvious stuff. I don't mean that she gets tired easier, or that she's more emotional, or that her body is changing. I was ready for all of that. What I wasn't ready for was who she was becoming, or maybe. And this is the part that keeps me up at night, who she always was, and I just never had to deal with it until now. The fight started small. Everything does a comment here, a cold shoulder there, the kind of stuff you brush off because you're an adult and you pick your battles, but they started stacking up. And I started noticing a pattern that I couldn't unnotice once I saw it. I'm the only one working right now. That's fine. I accepted that Claire stopped freelancing when the pregnancy got uncomfortable in the first trimester, and I told her genuinely, no strings attached, don't worry about it. I've got us 4 words I now say to myself at 2 a.m., wondering if I meant them, because here's where it gets complicated. About 6 weeks into the pregnancy, I found out that Claire had been carrying a credit card debt she'd never mentioned to me. $2,000. Not the end of the world, I know that, but she'd been hiding it quietly, paying the minimum every month, letting the interest pile up. And when I found out, I didn't yell, I didn't make it dramatic, I just paid it off. Logged into the account, cleared the balance, done. I thought that was the right move. I thought she'd be relieved. She was relieved. She was furious. And the reason she gave me, I still didn't fully know what to do with it. She said I should have asked her first. That was the reason I paid off her debt money. She owed interest. She was hemorrhaging every month, and her problem with it was that I didn't consult her before doing it. I sat with that for a second. Then I said pretty calmly, I think, Claire, it was $2,000 of debt. I cleared it. How is that a bad thing? She crossed her arms and said, because I had a plan for that money. I asked what plan. She pulled up her phone and showed me a handbag, a designer handbag. I won't say the brand, but I will say that the price tag had 4 digits, and none of them were after a decimal point. She'd been saving her word saving to buy it, and my paying off her debt had in her mind taken that money away from her. I remember just staring at her, not angry, not yet, just genuinely trying to understand the logic. We're pregnant. I'm the sole income she has, revolving credit card debt, and the plan was a bag. I didn't say any of that out loud. I just nodded slowly and said I needed some air. And I went and sat in the car in the driveway for about 20 minutes, doing absolutely nothing. That was the first moment I felt it. Not anger, something quieter, a kind of loneliness that doesn't make sense on paper. I was spending every evening with this woman. We were having a baby together. Our lives were completely intertwined, and I felt completely alone. The weeks that followed didn't help Claire's. Emotional swings got sharper. Some of that is pregnancy. I know that I'm not an idiot, but there's a difference between hormones and patterns, and what I was seeing felt like a pattern. Every conversation about money ended with me being cast as the villain. Every time I raised a concern gently, carefully, it somehow became about something I'd done wrong. 3 months ago, she stopped asking how my day was, small thing. But I noticed, and the more I tried to close the distance between us, the more she seemed to pull back into her own world, a world that revolved entirely around the pregnancy, the nursery, the registry, the due date. As if I was more of a financial backdrop than an actual partner in any of it. I brought it up one night, told her I was feeling disconnected, that I wanted us to be a team through this. She told me I was being selfish. That word hit different than she probably intended it to because I'd been quietly paying every bill, every appointment, every craving at 11 p.m., and selfish was the word she landed on. I didn't argue, I just went to bed. But I didn't sleep. There's a specific kind of moment in a long relationship where something small becomes a mirror and you look into it and you see the whole thing. Not just the argument you're currently in, but every argument before it. Every pattern, every compromise that maybe wasn't actually a compromise at all. Mine happened on a Tuesday. Claire had gone to lunch with her mom. I was working from home, and somewhere around noon, I went to grab something from her nightstand, a charger, nothing dramatic, and I knocked over her journal. I'm not a guy who reads his wife's private things. I want to say that clearly. I put it back, but a page fell open, and before I could close it, one sentence caught my eye. I won't quote it word for word, but the gist of it was this. She wrote that she felt like she'd settled, that somewhere in the last few years, she'd lost her ambition, her independence, her sense of self, and that the pregnancy had made her realize she needed more from her life than what she currently had. I stood there in the bedroom for a long time, because here's the thing, I understood it, I actually did. Losing yourself in a long relationship is real feeling, like life narrowed when you expected it to expand. That's real too. I felt for her genuinely, but then I kept thinking about the bag, the debt she hid the word selfish. She threw at me while I was paying every bill we had, and I started doing the math on something I hadn't let myself calculate before her unhappiness was new. It was caused by the pregnancy. The pregnancy had just removed the last layer of insulation between who she was performing to be and who she actually was, and who she actually was someone who resented the life we'd built together. Not me specifically, not with hatred, but in that quiet, suffocating way where you stay and you smile at the right moments and you go on the vacations and you make the plans. But somewhere underneath all of it, you're keeping a private score of everything you gave up. I sat on the edge of the bed and I did something I hadn't done in probably 2 years. I cried, not because I was angry, not even because I was hurt exactly. I cried because I suddenly understood that the distance I'd been feeling for months wasn't a phase or a pregnancy symptom or bad timing. It was the truth of us finally surfacing, and we had a baby coming in 5 months. I didn't tell her I'd seen the journal. I know how that sounds, but I needed time to figure out what I actually wanted to do with what I now knew. Because walking in and saying, I read your private thoughts, was going to detonate the conversation before it even started, and I wasn't ready for that kind of wreckage yet. So instead, I did what a lot of guys do when they don't know how to process something. I got busy, aggressively, pointlessly busy. I started staying later on work calls that didn't need me. I reorganized the garage on a Saturday. Instead of sitting with her on the couch, I booked a guy's dinner with my friend Marcus. First time I'd done that in months, and I used it less to catch up and more to just sit somewhere that didn't feel like a ticking clock. Marcus noticed something was off within about 20 minutes. He didn't push. He just said, "You look like a man doing math. He doesn't want to finish," which was so accurate. It was almost annoying. I told him the broad strokes, the debt, the bag, the disconnection I left out of the journal entirely that felt too private, even to say out loud. His response was quieter than I expected. He just said, "Are you happy, man? Forget the baby, forget the money. Just, are you happy?" I opened my mouth to answer and nothing came out, which was its own kind of answer when I got home that night. Claire was already in bed. I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water and stared at nothing for a while, and then I made a decision that I think came from the right place, but landed completely wrong. I woke her up. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I told her I wanted to talk. She was groggy, slightly irritated, and I just told her I'd been feeling disconnected, that I was scared. We were losing each other, that I needed to know we were actually in this together and not just occupying the same space. She listened, actually listened, which I hadn't expected. And then she said something that I've replayed about 100 times since. She said, "I know I've been hard to be around, but Ryan, you never actually ask me what I need. You just decide what's best and do it like the debt you didn't help me. You just fixed it. Like I was a problem. I wanted to argue. Every part of me wanted to say, I paid off your debt at 11% interest while you were planning to buy a handbag. How is that the wrong move? But I didn't. I just asked her quietly, genuinely, so what do you need? She thought about it for a long moment, and what she said next made me realize this conversation was nowhere near over. She said she needed a therapist, not couples counseling, her own therapist, someone she could talk to alone without me in the room, without having to manage my reaction while she processed her own thoughts. I said yes immediately. Of course, whatever she needed. But then she said the second part, she wanted her mother to move in with us temporarily, just until the baby came, maybe a little after, for support. I went very still. Her mother, Linda, is not a bad person. I want to be fair here. She raised Claire mostly on her own. She works hard, she means well, but Linda and I have a particular dynamic that I can only describe as two people who have been professionally polite to each other for 10 years without ever actually becoming comfortable. She thinks I'm too rigid. I think she has never once in her life considered that other people might have boundaries worth respecting. We manage fine in 4-hour increments at holidays. The idea of sharing a bathroom with her indefinitely was a different conversation entirely. I didn't say no outright. I said I needed to think about it. Claire's face did something complicated when I said that, not quite anger, more like confirmation, like I'd just proven a point she'd already made to herself privately. She said, "See, this is what I mean. I ask for support, and you have to think about it." And look, I understood her logic, I did, but I also thought and did not say, "Babe, you had $2,000 of secret debt and were planning to spend it on a bag. And when I ask for time to consider your mother moving into our home, the problem I kept that inside, swallowed it whole. The next 3 days were quiet in that particular way. That's louder than any argument. We moved around each other carefully, like two people sharing a kitchen and pretending they're not. Then Linda called me directly. First time she'd ever done that without Claire being on the line. She said she just wanted to tell me she didn't want to cause any tension, that she'd stay out of the way, that she just wanted to be there for her daughter. It was a genuinely decent phone call, and I almost felt bad for my resistance, almost, because 20 minutes after we hung up, I got a text from Claire. She'd already told her mom she could come the conversation between us about whether it would happen. The one I was still supposedly thinking about had apparently already been resolved without me. I sat with that text for a long time. Then Marcus called randomly just to check in. I told him about Linda. He laughed. Not meanly, just that particular laugh men do when something is so precisely terrible that humor is the only available response. So let me get this straight. He said, "You're the only one working. You paid off her debt. You got shut down for it. You agreed to therapy. And now her mom's moving in, and you still haven't told Claire about the journal I had." And suddenly, sitting there with Marcus' voice on the other end of the phone, I understood that the journal wasn't just in something I'd seen. It was something I was carrying alone every single day, and I had no idea how much longer I could keep doing that. Linda arrived on a Friday with 2 suitcases and a slow cooker. I helped carry her bags in. I smiled. I showed her where the towels were. I was so relentlessly pleasant about the whole thing that later that night I sat alone in the garage and just stared at the wall for 20 minutes, trying to remember what it felt like to want to go inside my own house. The first week wasn't terrible. Linda cooked, which Claire appreciated. She came to one of the prenatal appointments, which made Claire visibly happier than she'd been in weeks. I watched my wife light up with her mother in the room, and I felt 2 things simultaneously: genuine relief that she was happier, and something else, something smaller and uglier, that I'm not proud of, a quiet voice asking why that lightness never seemed to show up when it was just the 2 of us. I started sleeping badly, not the tossing and turning kind. The worst kind, where you fall asleep fine and then wake up at 3 a.m. with your brain already running. It'd lie there in the dark next to Claire, who was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, and I just think, not productively, just in circles about the journal, about the word, settled about the bag and the debt and the slow cooker sitting on my kitchen counter that nobody asked me about. One night, I got up, went to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't need, and just sat at the table in the dark, and Linda walked in. She couldn't sleep either. Apparently, she looked at me for a second, then at the coffee. Then she just went and poured herself a cup without asking and sat down across from me. We sat in silence for a while, not uncomfortable silence, just quiet. Then she said, without looking up from her mug, "She's scared, not of the baby, of herself." I didn't say anything. Linda continued, "Claire's always needed to feel like she was in control of her own story. When she's not, she pushes. It's not right, but it's who she is." I looked at her. "Did she tell you about the debt?" Linda nodded slowly. "Did she tell you why she was angry when I paid it off?" Another nod, and I asked Linda wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me in that particular way older women do when they're deciding how honest to actually be. Then she said she was embarrassed. Ryan nodded you at herself. And embarrassed people do stupid things. They pick fights. They reframe the story, so they're not the one who got it wrong. I sat with that. It was the most useful thing anyone had said to me in 4 months. Then Linda added quietly, "But that doesn't mean you're not allowed to be tired." I had expected that I looked down at my coffee, and for a second I was dangerously close to losing it. Right there at my kitchen table at 3 a.m. in front of my mother-in-law, I held it together barely. But something about that conversation cracked something open in me, because for the first time since all of this started, someone had acknowledged that I was in this too, that my experience of the last few months was real and valid, and not just a selfish distraction from Claire's pregnancy. I went back to bed around 4 a.m. and lay there staring at the ceiling, and I made a decision, not about the marriage, not about the baby, just one small specific decision. Tomorrow I was going to tell Claire about the journal. The couple's counselor's name was Dr. Patricia Webb, late 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, an office that smelled like cedar and old books. She had this particular way of asking questions that made you feel like you'd arrived at the answer yourself, which I later realized was entirely intentional and kind of impressive. First session, she asked us each to describe the relationship in one word. Claire said complicated, I said worth it. Dr. Webb wrote both down without reacting, which felt like its own kind of diagnosis. We went every Thursday for 6 weeks before the baby came. Some sessions were uncomfortable in the way that's actually useful, the kind where you drive home mostly quiet because you're both processing something real. Some were harder than that. There was one session week 3 where Claire said something about feeling invisible in her own pregnancy, and I said something about feeling invisible in my own marriage. And Dr. Webb just let both of those things sit in the room together without rushing to fix them. That hour cost me $160 and was worth every cent. Linda stayed for 2 months left, 2 weeks before the due date, which I think was deliberate, her way of making sure Claire and I had to find our footing as a unit before everything changed. Smart woman, I told her that when I carried her suitcases back to her car, she patted my arm and said, "You're a good man, Ryan, just make sure she knows that." Then she drove away, and I stood on the sidewalk feeling something I hadn't expected to feel, watching her go. Grateful the baby arrived on a Thursday morning 6 days early, which felt appropriate given that nothing about the previous 9 months had gone according to any plan either of us had made. A boy, we named him Daniel. He was loud and red-faced and absolutely furious about being born, which honestly I respected. I stood in that delivery room watching Claire, exhausted, triumphant, completely wrecked, and completely luminous. And I thought about the guy who had been sitting in the driveway in his car 4 months ago, trying to understand how paying off a debt had become a betrayal. That guy felt very far away. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Claire was still in individual therapy. We were still in couples counseling. The money conversations were still sometimes hard. She still had moments of pulling inward when she should have been reaching toward me, and I still had moments of quietly absorbing things. I should have said out loud sooner, but we were doing the work, both of us actually doing it, not just agreeing to do it and then waiting for the other person to go first. About a month after Daniel came home, we were both awake at 2 a.m., not from anxiety this time, just from a small person who had extremely strong opinions about his feeding schedule. Claire was in the nursing chair by the window. I was on the edge of the bed, half asleep. The room was dark except for the streetlight coming through the curtain. She said quietly, "Not really to me, but not to me." I don't think I settled. I looked over at her. She was looking down at Daniel. I think I just got scared, and when I get scared, I rewrite the story. So I'm not the one who made the choices. It's a bad habit. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I know I'm familiar with the habit." She looked up at me. Something passed between us that doesn't really have a word. Not forgiveness, exactly not resolution. More like mutual recognition. Two people acknowledging that they'd both been imperfect in specific and complementary ways and had somehow ended up here anyway, in the dark, with this furious small person between them. She laughed first, just a small, tired laugh. Then I did Daniel for the record, did not find any of it funny, and made his position on the matter very clear. Some nights are still hard. Some conversations still cost more than they should, but I go to sleep most nights in a house that feels like mine again. Next to a woman, I actually know not the version I'd constructed over 10 years of comfortable assumptions, but the real one, complicated and difficult and worth it. That's the word I used in session 1. Turns out I was right.